Mike McCarthy's son wrote him a farewell letter, and in it, Ross asked his dad to campaign for better mental health support for people like him in need. That was all Mike needed to pick up the baton and devote himself to developing one of the biggest suicide awareness and prevention initiatives the UK has ever seen. The Baton of Hope is a nationwide campaign that is striving to achieve a zero suicide society. A society where suicide and suicide prevention are openly and widely discussed, and where we inspire hope through action and support, where we remove shame, stigma and silence. I'm Dan Holland. Speaking of Suicide is made in support of and in collaboration with Mikey's Line, and this episode has been sponsored by Arnold Clark. Now, as always, Speaking of Suicide is meant to be open and honest. That's the whole point of it. But sometimes that doesn't make for an easy listen. So remember, if you want to, you can press pause. And don't forget there is support available from Mikey's Line, and I'll give out their details after we've heard from Mike. Mike, just outline for us, what is the Baton of Hope?
The Baton of Hope, if you think Olympic torch, it'll sort of follow similar but not the same lines. It's basically a symbol of hope, as the name suggests. This is a physical baton that's been designed and created by goldsmiths to the Queen, no less. And basically, because it's a baton, it represents responsibility in the same way that when you pass a baton in a relay race, you pass on responsibility to the next person. And the reason for that is that we believe that everybody has a responsibility when it comes to suicide prevention, whether you're at the top of government formulating suicide prevention strategies and policies, or whether it's just, an extra text to your mate to say, how are you really? So that's, in a nutshell, the sort of thinking behind Baton of Hope. And we hope to take it around the UK and highlight examples of best practice in terms of suicide prevention. There are some excellent charities out there doing great work who very rarely get mentioned. In fact, maybe this is something that we can talk about. The whole area of suicide is very much a silent pandemic. So we want to smash the stigma, get a good, healthy, open, transparent conversation going about something that is the biggest killer of under 35-year-olds in this country. But also, and this is very important, we want to have a legacy so that after the tour, there is real, practical, enduring change that will save lives and stop this stagnation in the suicide figures in the UK.
So it's not just a physical baton, there's this metaphorical baton to start a conversation, to change society, to change our mindset. Am I right in understanding that?
Absolutely. We think it's time, in fact, the time is long overdue, to open up the conversation about something that we sweep under the carpet. As I say, the suicide figures in the UK have stagnated for more than 20 years now. And it's widely accepted by clinicians, by people working in mental health services, by politicians, that suicide is preventable. So we are asking the question, why aren't we preventing them? Why aren't we making any inroads into this huge issue for the nation, let alone, why aren't we talking about it? Where are the political debates? Where is the public discourse? Where's the media coverage? Where are the conversations in the classroom, in the lecture theatres, etc.? The Baton of Hope represents something far beyond its physical existence, if you like.
And you use the word hope, and I wonder what you think the significance of the word hope is, because when we're talking about mental health and we're talking about suicide, sometimes you hear people talk about trying to be happy or seek happiness, but actually hope is a really significant word. And I wonder what your thoughts of the power of hope are in this situation.
I think that the reasons why people take their own lives are complex and very varied. Each person has a different story to tell. But I think that one thing that is a common theme, at least, within suicides is the loss of hope. And I think that when someone loses all hope, then of course, they're at much greater risk of potentially taking their own lives. And my son Ross, who took his life last year, left a long farewell letter. And one of the things that he said in that letter was, "Please fight for mental health. The support is just not there." What Ross meant is that he had battled with severe depression for more than 10 years and then went to the National Health Service and asked for therapy. He was put on a 6-month waiting list and he died 2 weeks into that wait. He'd lost hope. I think Ross highlighted an enormous issue, and I think in many ways the support isn't there. But we do believe that there is hope for people, that people can be saved, that there is salvation, that with hope we can find a solution and save lives.
Tell me about Ross, Mike. What sort of young man was he?
Ross was 31. He grew up as a happy boy in a stable family. He was funny, sometimes mischievous, made us laugh a lot. He was basically a good, decent, kind, hard-working family man, devoted to his fiancée, Charlotte, and his little son, Charlie, who's now 5. And we had conversations about his state of health, and Ross accepted always readily that he was lucky to have all the things in life that he'd sought. Happy relationship. He would have been married to Charlotte had it not been for COVID lockdown. But he was ill. And, just as some people develop physical illnesses, Ross developed a mental illness and tried his hardest. He was a fighter, he was a warrior, he tried everything in his pursuit of salvation, shall we say. And towards the end, he thought he'd actually cracked it. He found and paid for his own counsellor and really related to the counsellor. And the last time we saw him was in Christmas 2020, when we celebrated the fact that Ross had made so much progress that year. And we'll never know for sure, but we think that the depression came back with a vengeance. And maybe he thought that he tried everything and ultimately nothing had worked for him. And so he took his life, and he was a loving son. I'm as proud as any dad could be of him, what he achieved, and I'm just grateful for fantastic memories and the 31 years that we had with him.
If you want a moment, Mike, we can do.
No, I'm fine. Thanks, Dan.
Did he talk to you at all about his depression and his mental health and his difficulties? Did he talk to anyone about it?
He did. He spoke openly to his family, certainly, about it, and we were all, only too aware of the difficulties that he'd faced. But he tried to keep working, and he didn't like to take time off work. He just got that kind of work ethic, I guess. But we did talk quite a lot, and he tried to take his own life the year before, and we spoke to him at length after that, and he promised that he would never try again. So it wasn't one of those situations where, somebody just takes their life completely out of the blue without any record of having approached a GP or spoken even to close friends and family. And as I say, he left a long farewell letter. It was 12 pages long, and part of the explanation was in that, but inevitably with a situation like this, there are always questions that we'll never be able to answer.
You talked about hope earlier on there, Mike. In that horrific aftermath, people react in different ways when a loved one or someone very close to them takes their own life. How did you react to all of that? Did you lose hope?
Yeah, it felt like I was falling through just black space, and, that it would be never ending, that I'd never sort of come to any kind of landing, that falling sensation would just go on forever. I felt like a piece of driftwood, that I'd got no direction at all. It was just a sort of horrible aching void. And for a time, I did lose hope. But then, it's Ross's words in the letter, please fight for mental health. The support is just not there. Eventually, that kind of gripped me and made me realise that, the least I could do for Ross, because I wasn't there at the end, I wasn't there to help him at the end. The least that I could do was try to honour what was effectively his dying wish. So I did as much research as I could. I spoke to as many people as I could, mums, dads, brothers, sisters, you name it, people who'd been bereaved by suicide, people who'd survived suicide attempts, doctors, nurses, charities, psychiatrists. Spoke to a whole range of people to try to better understand the issues surrounding suicide prevention. And what I discovered is that what Ross was saying was largely true, that, you can go to hospital feeling suicidal and be turned away and put on a 6-month waiting list. Now, Ross had what I describe as cancer of the mind. It was terminal. Okay, not as easy to spot as some other terminal illnesses, but it was terminal. He was in a very high risk category, having tried to take his own life once before, and yet he was turned away. We wouldn't turn away someone who was dying of cancer, quite rightly, of course. So why do we turn people away who are, at the very least, in danger of losing their life to a mental illness? And I think, the more I studied, the more I realised that this had been the situation in the UK for more than 20 years, that the figures had stagnated, that although the clinicians agreed that suicide is preventable, we weren't preventing them effectively. Sure, we were saving lives. And I really would like to make the point that there's a lot of great work going on out there, some fantastic charities doing excellent work. But I think certainly within the suicide prevention sector, if I can call it that, there's fragmentation and people aren't speaking with one voice. And I think we need unity. We need to unify. And this is another key principle of the Baton of Hope. We need to unify to make sure that once and for all we tackle this problem and aim at least towards a zero suicide society. We may never get there, but better to aim for zero suicide than to just let years of neglect pass by.
Let's just pause for a sec, because if anyone is listening to this and wants someone to talk to, or is worried about a friend or a family member who they think might need some help, then you can text Mikey's line on 07786 207755, or you can contact them via Messenger, web chat or Twitter on Sunday to Thursday 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. and Friday to Saturday 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Mike, let's talk more about the Baton of Hope, because you've described this dreadful situation of this stagnation of how society, of the figures, which are just awful for society, and you paint a really dark and upsetting picture of where services are for people across the whole country. You set up the Baton of Hope with Steve Phillip, who we spoke to on a previous podcast, and speaking of suicide. Steve, we know, has his own loss of Jordan, his son. Together, you sound like a formidable force, a force for good, because ultimately a zero suicide society would be wonderful. It really, really would, and it would be wrong to say, goodness, that's a real challenge, but it's the little steps to take, isn't it, I guess?
It is. None of us can do it alone. No single charity, no single individual, no single organisation. And this is why we talk about uniting behind the Baton of Hope, because we do have to tackle this together, and we can. There are things that people can do. There is hope. And we want to, bring back hope to the hundreds of thousands who find themselves in the same dark place that Jordan and Ross found themselves. We want to reach these people and let them know that we can bring about change. I think as a nation, we've been incredibly let down and neglected in terms of suicide prevention over many, many years. And the time, as I said earlier, is long overdue. We need to sort of tackle this head on. So we're very, very heartened by the response that we've had so far to the Baton of Hope. Hundreds of people from around the country have contacted the Baton of Hope organising committee and expressed their belief and support in it, and asked how they can get involved and how they can help, which is wonderful, and it's something that we're getting our heads around at the moment. So yeah, we want it to be, to have a kind of universal appeal. We're not specifically targeting any audience because, again, as I said, every one of us has a responsibility, and it may just be a hand on someone's shoulder or that extra call, as I say. We can all play a part.
There are seven key pillars to creating this zero suicide society. Talk me through some of these pillars and how they will affect change.
Well, we are putting together a number of charters in which we will outline, we are doing the research, we're talking to the experts, we're talking to people with lived experience, which is extremely important, and we will draft charters, a charter for education, a charter for politics, a charter for the media, a charter for the health service, etc., on how we see a practical way forward, a way that is going to break this dreadful status quo that we have at the moment. And we're hoping to approach all of that with humility, with compassion, and, with understanding. But we are also determined that if the Baton of Hope is going to mean anything, sure, we want to smash the stigma, sure, we want to get people talking, but if it's going to mean anything, it has to have a legacy, and that legacy will be practical change, real change that will ultimately save lives. It's a huge task, but it's one that we have the capability to achieve.
Many conversations I've heard and had with people have been aimed at trying to help those who are struggling with their mental health to know where to find the support or where to access the support. It sounds like you're coming at this almost from completely the opposite direction. It's saying, here's the people who have the ability to change the access, to change the society, to change the boundaries that some people may face, physical or metaphorical, and break those down and open everything up for those people like Ross and Jordan to provide better support. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I suppose, it's two-pronged. We want to highlight best practice that we find at the moment, but we also want to improve services. We'd very much like some of the agencies involved in suicide prevention to come together to work out how, in unification, we can change the system at the moment. I sometimes think, if war were the main reason for the loss of under 35s in this country, we'd hear about it every day. If it was COVID, we'd certainly hear about it every day. Drugs, road accidents, it's none of those things. It's suicide, and we don't hear about it. So the first step is to open the conversation and make it transparent so that we can normalise discussions about suicide, and we can abandon phrases such as commit suicide, which, as you know, the word commit goes back to a time more than 60 years ago when suicide in this country was illegal. People could be and were put in prison having survived the suicide attempt. We've come some distance from them, but we're still using the language of the Dark Ages. Where a few weeks ago, an MP who decided that he wanted to take some time off work through depression was reported in some of the newspapers, and some of them, used the phrase that he'd admitted to fighting depression. Well, I wouldn't admit to a cold, or I wouldn't admit to having any other illness. So why do we have to admit that we have depression? It's common enough, all too sadly.
It's about changing how we rethink mental health problems are treated, isn't it? And when I say treated, I mean they're placed in that kind of hierarchy of illness. I read a post on LinkedIn recently of a father who'd intervened in his daughter's attempt to take her own life. And it was a really heartbreaking read, but it was really honest. And he ended what he'd written by explaining why he'd been so public so soon. And I think it was 48 hours after the event. And he said he did it because he was ashamed of society not allowing people to be honest. And that was his way of trying to break down this stigma. And I thought that was really, really powerful in his honesty.
I think people generally are very sympathetic and very supportive. The vast majority of people we know and that we've spoken to have been incredibly compassionate and helpful with their support. But I think there is still a huge reluctance to discuss suicide. And I think, one of the key things that we need to address is what politicians and others call parity of esteem, which basically means that we spend a lot less on mental health than we do on physical health. It gets a fraction of the attention that physical health attracts. You switch on your television tonight and there'll be programs about what you should be eating, how many calories you should be taking, what your body should look like, ad infinitum. But where are the mainstream programs about mental health? Where is all the advice about how to, look after our mental health? Because there is no health without mental health. You can be the fittest person on the planet, but if you don't have mental health, good health, then there's little point in being super physically fit. So, yeah, and I think, it's not just the conversations around suicide. We know as a bereaved family that the way that people are often treated in situations like this is woeful, and it's not because of any sense of unkindness or malice out there. Of course it isn't. But as one example, when Ross died, we drove through the night. We got the call in the middle of the night, and we drove through the night to where he lived, which was 2 hours away. And by the time we got there, the police had taken away the farewell letter. And just at the time when your mind is spinning with circular conversations about the whys and wherefores and, what ifs, there was a document, a 12-page document that could have at least answered some of the questions for us, and I guess, eased a little bit of the agony. And it took us a week to get the letter back. We couldn't even get a digital copy. In fact, we didn't get the actual letter back for months. And we had to try very hard to get hold of that letter. Now, I don't think this was the police service being unkind, but I think the system sometimes, not just in the police service, but the health service and other areas, can sometimes be glacial. And I think we've got to turn that round, and we've got to focus on where the help is really needed. People who lose someone to suicide are at much greater risk of suicide themselves. And again, I think this is largely overlooked. So it's got to be a sea change. We've got to turn things around and look at it from the perspective of the person who needs the help, not from the perspective of what suits the institutions.
Absolutely. And hopefully conversations like this and hearing the passion in your voice, Mike, helps people realise that and affect that change. Where can people find out more about the Baton of Hope, Mike?
Well, they can go on our website for a start, which is www.batonofhopeuk.org. And there's a lot of information on there, and people who want to register their interest, if they feel that they'd like to be involved in this initiative, they can register their interest on our website, and that will trigger a response from us. We're just contacting now all of those sort of hundreds of people who've been in touch with us. And the more the merrier. We want as many people as possible to join us and make the Baton of Hope a success. But, more importantly, to reach out to people, let them know that there is hope, and ultimately to save lives.
I hope so too. We'll put a link to that website for the Baton of Hope into the show notes of this podcast too. And I think you're coming up to Inverness next summer as well.
The route isn't finalised yet, Dan, and the reason for that is that, again, we don't want to be a charity that kind of sits back and says, right, you come to us for advice. We want to know where we should be going and why. We want to find these examples of best practice. We want to, if we can, galvanise communities to maybe set up their own project, their own charity. It could be anything. It could be, a garden of hope, for example, on a community allotment or whatever. We're hoping there'll be things like photography competitions where people are encouraged to capture the essence of hope in a picture or a short film. There are lots and lots of ideas that we think people can get involved with themselves, and to sort of show the world that yeah, this is a huge problem, but we haven't given up hope. You know, one of the things that I really wanted to do when we lost Ross was to sort of, you know, shut the door on the world and just, you know, be left alone. But you know, I and many hundreds of others have realised that, you know, that that's not of any use to anybody. And you know, when Ross said, "Please fight for mental health," well, Ross, this is what we're doing. You know, this is what we're trying to do on your behalf and on behalf of all of the hundreds of thousands who lost hope like you. It doesn't need to be like this.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for sharing about the Baton of Hope with us and telling us so openly and honestly about Ross. And if the Baton of Hope should come to Inverness, then I really hope we can bring the Baton of Hope and Mikey's Line together sometime next year. Mike, thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
But thank you for inviting me.
A reminder of Mikey's Line's details. If you or someone you know needs help or advice, you can text 07786 207755. That's 07786 207755. Or contact them via Messenger, web chat or Twitter. They're available Sunday to Thursday, 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. and Friday to Saturday, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. Now here's Shona McPherson from Mikey's Line with a few thoughts for you to take away.
Mike faced a loss of hope, a crisis of hope, when he lost Ross to suicide. He lost hope in service provision for people who are feeling mentally unwell or who are suicidal. His son was turned away when he was in danger. And Mike shares that he asked, where are the conversations? Why are we not talking about suicide? Where is the support? Where is the hope? And then with Ross's words, please fight for mental health. The support isn't there. It's like Mike himself was handed a baton. He is working to honour Ross's dying wish by seeking to be part of the answer to his own questions. He is bringing a message of hope to this dire situation. And his message is that suicide and mental health are all of our problem. And that a zero suicide society can be achieved if we unite our efforts, or we can certainly move towards that if we unite our efforts to work from the perspective of the people who need the help. So we all need to share that baton of hope. And as Mike says, that us passing on that baton of hope doesn't have to be some big grand gesture. It can be in what we could perceive as the small acts of asking a friend if they are okay, of having conversations that feel vulnerable. A podcaster called Madeline Black talks about hope as an acronym: Hold on, pain ends. Hold on, pain ends. If you are listening to this and you feel hopeless right now, please know that you're not alone, that you matter, and please speak to someone that you trust. It could be a friend, it could be a family member, a GP, or support worker from an organisation like Mikey's Line. People do care, so please don't be alone if you do feel hopeless.
Huge thanks to Shona and all the team at Mikey's Line for the work they do. The podcast platform is supported by D&D Paving Limited. Please do like, share and comment about the podcast. And if you want to get involved by sponsoring an episode or telling your story, just get in touch with Mikey's Line. Speaking of Suicide is an adventurous audio production. The music is Nana by Tom Ireland. Mike McCarthy's son sent him a farewell letter, and in it Ross asked his dad to campaign for better mental health support for people like him in need. That was all Mike needed to pick up the baton and devote himself to developing one of the biggest suicide awareness and prevention initiatives the UK has ever seen. The Baton of Hope is a nationwide campaign that is striving to achieve a zero suicide society, a society where suicide and suicide prevention are openly and widely discussed, and where we inspire hope through action and support, where we remove shame, stigma and silence. Now, speaking of suicide is meant to be open and honest. That's the whole point of it. But as we know, that doesn't always make for an easy listen. So remember, you can always press pause. And don't forget there is support available from Mikey's line. I'll give out their details after we've heard from Mike.